Hey guys, this is Miss Arlequin, and in this lesson, we are going to look at a test-taking strategy that involves looking or previewing the questions before you read the passage. And it is a strategy that's meant to not only save you time, but also improve your overall comprehension of the passage that you're reading. All right, so usually when you look at the questions first, the first thing you do is you read the directions in the title. That'll give you an idea as to what the text is about, if it's fiction, if it's nonfiction, just what the general topic is. But then you don't read the passage, you go right to the questions. And you obviously, want to make sure you understand the questions. So you break them down, you look for keywords, anything that's going to tell you exactly what the question's asking you to do, what you need to look for. So you want to make sure that for each question, you know what the specific thing you need to look for in the passage is. Then, just as a reminder, you want to go back to the beginning of the passage, and at the top, or somewhere in the margin, you want to jot down those keywords or details that you want to focus on while you're reading. And then as you read the passage, you want to just try to look for the answers, and when you find them, highlight and maybe even number it if you're looking for more than one question. If you're highlighting something, which question number is that highlighting going along with? Now, I usually find that this strategy works best, or at least it's more manageable, when you just have a couple of questions. So passages that have short responses, like just one or two short response questions or an extended response, this would be the easiest. If you did want to use it for a multiple choice passage, it would be a little bit harder. However, another benefit of looking at the questions first is that it gives you an idea from the way the questions are phrased and the answer choices what the passage is about. So it's almost like a previewing strategy that before you even start the first paragraph, you might already know who some of the characters are, what some of the events that are going to occur, or some of the topics are going to be, which, of course, anytime you have prior knowledge about a text is only going to help you. All right, so I'm going to model the use of the strategy using a passage from the 2016 7th grade New York State ELA exam. This was from day 2, and it is the extended response passage. So we've got our passage and then an essay that we have to write for this passage. It's called My Brooklyn Grandmother from The Lost Garden. The fact that it says it's from something tells me that this is an excerpt. And the fact that these words are in italics tells me that this is a book title, because book titles are italicized. And then this must be the name of the chapter from the book, because you would put chapter titles in quotation marks. All right, so then I go directly to the question. The question says, the author learns a lesson about culture from his grandmother. How does the author learn this lesson? How does the author show that this lesson has remained with him into his adult life? Use details from the passage to support your response. All right, so I'm looking for keywords. Keywords are the really significant words that if I were to take them out of the sentence wouldn't make as much sense, or very important meaning from the sentence would be lost. In this case, since this is a prompt, it's the words that are specifically telling me what to do, what I'm writing about, topic words. The first thing they say is that the author learns a lesson. All right, so I need to look as I'm reading, what lesson about culture does the author learn? How does he learn this lesson? So how is an important keyword. When they say how, that has to mean the steps or the ways. The ways that the lesson is taught to him, or the steps he has to follow to learn that lesson. And then it says, how does the author show that this lesson has remained with him into his adult life? I could highlight the word lesson, but since I've already highlighted it already, there's no reason to highlight it once again. What's remains with him? It's implied that it's the lesson. All right, and then you got your bullet points. Your bullet points in the extended response basically just say the same thing as the prompt, but they put it in bullet point form so that when you're writing, you can use it as a checklist, and you can treat each bullet point as a separate paragraph, so it's a way to help you stay organized. All right, so I go to the top of my passage. I jot down the keywords that I highlighted. I want to look for the lesson about culture. I want to look for anything that shows me how he learns it, and then I want to look for anything that shows that the lesson has remained with him. All right, My Brooklyn Grandmother from the Lost Garden by Lawrence Yep. During my early years of writing, one of the strongest influences on my life had been my grandmother, and it was inevitable that she should also affect my writing. As I said, she lived in Brooklyn Place, so that I sometimes thought of her as my Brooklyn grandmother. I didn't always know what to make of my grandmother, and I don't think she always knew what to make of me. We were like two wrestlers on a slippery mat where the true victory would have lain in a mutual embrace that would have supported one another. But it was as if we were oiled, our hands slipping even as we tried to grip one another. Most of the time, though, it didn't matter how different I was. She accepted her Americanized grandchild, and the way she expressed that love was with food. All right, so it seems like the lesson's probably going to be related to food. As the youngest, I would often be seated next to her at a family banquet, so she would, of course, heap my plate with food. If I didn't clear the plate, she was bound to think something was wrong with the food, so I would dutifully make my way through the pile of food. However, if I made the mistake of turning to say something to someone else, I would find the plate heaped up once again. Eating with my grandmother took a certain amount of concentration. All right, so far I know that the grandmother is really interested in food. That's how she shows her love. He gave some examples of the way that she treats eating and food. But so far no lesson, but it's clear that this lesson is going to be related to food. My grandmother had become a great cook, and like any good cook, my grandmother was careful about her praise. The highest compliment she gave to another cook was to allow how Aunt Mary's cooking wasn't bad. Like all good cooks, my grandmother was especially particular about the ingredients. All right, so this is something I'm learning about the grandmother. I feel like it's important. For one thing, she preferred small sweet potatoes, eating those with gusto. She was fussiest, though, about rice. All right, so she's very particular, especially when it comes to rice. One day, she asked me to help her in the kitchen, which was her way of saying that she was going to teach me. All right, so here, if you're going to teach, this is where the lesson is starting. First, she announced we were going to wash the rice. All right, so now I can see that this lesson is specifically about how to make rice. And he's starting with a key word, a signal word first, so I think that it's going to be steps in the process of making rice. That's the literal way that he's going to learn the lesson. But I have to remember that this is not just a lesson about making food. The question is asking me a lesson about culture. So if they're cooking rice, the cooking of the rice has to in some way be teaching him something about his culture. I can tell, well, I happen to have prior knowledge about this author, but even if I didn't, I see his last name, Yep. This is an Asian last name. So I'm going to say that this is a lesson about Asian culture, which makes sense because we know that rice is a very important food in Asian culture. All right, back to the story. In the old days, washing rice was wise because I'm told they used talcum on the grains. Even now, it's wise to wash the rice at least once to see what comes up. All right, in the old days. So not only is she teaching him how to make rice, but through the lesson, he learns some history, which I would say is connected to his culture. My grandmother had me pour lukewarm water into a pot of rice and swirl my hand around in it. Step 2. Instantly, the water turned milky, and she had me look alertly for stray bits of chaff or even the occasional pebble that might slip by the processing machines. All right, so he swirls his hand in. He's looking for debris, anything that doesn't belong. That's the third step, second and third. Then, setting the lid over most of the pot, I had to pour the water out gently. However, when I asked her what the next step was, she told me that the rice wasn't clean yet, and to refill the pot with lukewarm water and repeat the process. Okay, so they pour the water out. That's step 4. But then it seems like they're going to do it again. He had to repeat the process. So he has to keep cleaning it. By the 6th time, the water was clear no matter how often I swirled my hand around. Even then, that wasn't enough. I remember my fingers were wrinkled by the time she declared the dirt was gone, as were most of the vitamins and nutritional elements as well. All right, so this seems a little sarcastic. But I don't know if that noticing that it's sarcastic is really that important to my goal. I just happened to notice it. But what I do remember is that he started out this lesson about rice talking about how fussy she is. And then this seems to prove it, because cleaning the rice once, even twice, is not enough. She makes him clean it 6 times. That's very fussy. My grandmother, like most experienced cooks, never used exact measurements. It was a pinch of this or a handful of that. When she had me add water the final time, she rested her fingertip on the surface of the rice until the water came up almost to the knuckle of her index finger. So step 6 is measuring the rice, measuring the water, but using your knuckle instead of real instruments. So what lesson is she showing him here? I mean, it's part of learning how to cook the rice, but she's showing him that there's some kind of home-style cooking. It's definitely not a professional kind of cooking. And maybe it has something to do with like your instincts, that you follow your instincts when you're cooking, even if you don't have an exact tool. Then the rice was allowed to soak for a half hour before cooking. The rice was brought to a boil, stirred once with a spoon, and then allowed to simmer for 20 minutes. The result was rice of just the right consistency and density. So from all of these steps and being really fussy, she manages to cook perfect rice. So maybe the lesson that he's learning about his culture is that if you take the time to do something right, you'll actually make it perfect, right? Not to rush. Maybe that's part of his culture. Along with the cooking lessons, some of my grandmother's own personality soaked into me. All right, so this seems like this is part of culture. I've never been able to abide instant rice, which tastes mushy to me. Brown rice tastes musty, and I've never been able to get the hang of a modern rice cooker. Instead, I still make rice basically the way my grandmother showed me. Okay, if he's still doing it the way she showed him, this proves, I'm going to say it's question number 3, or the third, question number 3 from the prompt. How has the lesson remained with him? He still follows everything that she taught him, even to measuring the water in the pot with a knuckle, though I only wash the rice once now. I think some of the fussiness over the rice carries over into my writing, forcing me to write several drafts of a book before I'm satisfied. Okay, so she also has remained with him and influenced the way that he writes. As expressions of her love, she kept me well supplied with what I used to call potato chip fish, but which was really called dai, salted sand dabs, a small flat fish from Monterey that I've never been able to find since the Chinese fishing colony there disappeared. The flesh was denser and saltier than regular salted fish, home meat. All right, so part of his culture also is he still eats the cultural foods. However, it was something as humble and homely and unlikely as that taro root that called out the artist in her. She made many tasty and delightful dishes out of taro root, but I especially remember how she would take a taro root, cut a slender thread from it, and skillfully turn the root, making the thread grow longer until she had enough to make a small ball. Into this would go onions and bits of meat, and she would deep fry the whole concoction. Later, when I had left San Francisco to go to college, she always sent me boxes of special treats, from my favorite cookies to preserved plums to lop cheong, the latter of which I cooked on a hot plate with rice in my dorm room. Much to my delight, her care packages followed me all across America. So even when he's in college, his culture is still staying with him because the grandmother is keeping him connected by sending him all of these cultural foods. So he's never losing touch with his culture. So really, food is the way that he connects with Chinese culture, and it's the way that he connected with his grandmother. Now, I think that's very important. That's what's really going to show the deeper thought when I write this essay. If I only literally say that she taught him how to make rice, and that he learned it by following the steps with her in the kitchen, that's just a very literal understanding of this text. You really have to go deeper and talk about the cultural elements, the way she showed love, the way that she sent him the care packages, and the way it affected his writing. That's going to get the deeper thought into this essay. All right, so hopefully you can see how looking at the question first, especially a passage like this where there's really only one question you have to answer, so it's easy to focus. It really helped me during the reading to save time. I don't have to now look at the question and go back and find my evidence. I was able to find it and think about the question and think about how to answer it throughout the entire reading. And now I'm pretty confident that I can answer this. I've got my evidence all annotated already. I can get right to work.